Yes, he did. Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9PBS.
For sure. Hot temperatures here in St. Louis, but don't worry. January is only 6.5 months away. Lots of hot topics to discuss on this edition of Donnybrook. Thanks for joining us. Let's meet our panelists. She's sitting in for Wendy Weiss, who couldn't be here. Sarah Fenske from St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio. Mr. Bill McClellan from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch and STLtoday.com. Ray Hartmann from rawstory.com, the Big 550, KTRS, and the Riverfront Times. And from the St. Louis American, we welcome Alvin Reid. I do want to say that on Next Up, which is halfway through this hour, Bill and I will talk to 3 members from the LGBTQ community about Pride Month. Should be an excellent half hour. And turns out I learned that 2 of our viewers were married on June 17th, 1947, 75 years ago. So congratulations to Roland and Lorna Harris of Highland, Illinois. Apparently, that's such a rare feat that the Census Bureau doesn't even keep track of marriages that last 75 years. And apparently Roland is still writing for the, I guess it's the News Leader is the paper out there in Highland. And he's been doing that since 1971. So you writers on the panel, you must be impressed.
It's heartening to know.
It is. Hey, Ray, I want to ask you a couple of things here. Number one, there's breaking news. The Faisal Khan, the health director for St. Louis County, has given his notice. He'll be on the job until September the 2nd. Your opinion of his legacy, because he was the health director during the pandemic.
It was mixed. I liked him. I thought first of all he gave good advice during the pandemic. We all know he had a very bad day and ended up going on this little national tour that really, in retrospect, was pretty bad. I felt like, you know, we were a little too quick to cut slack to the MAGA mob that was accosting him, but you know, he clearly had a bad day. But I think that, you know, I think overall that he was a good guy that meant well. I think his general advice on the pandemic was good, but he should have resigned when the county council rejected him as health director. The idea that you're gonna Sam Page is gonna nominate him to the board, and then they say no, and he says, well, he's staying anyway. I didn't think that made sense.
Well, I don't feel I ought to kick the guy as he's leaving. However,
yes,
when you say he had a bad day, he went on national TV and was untruthful about St. Louis and St. Louis County and said that he was physically jostled, and he wasn't. And, you know, at a time when you want your health officials to be believable and people to listen to him, when you have a guy go on national TV and be untruthful, that's a very bad day.
It's not a good day.
No. Hey, well, Ray, I want to ask you, did Roy Blunt have a good week? The senior senator from the state of Missouri has signed onto this gun safety legislation at the federal level, which, among other things, would allow for red flag measures, meaning that authorities could take away firearms from people who are perceived to be dangerous. And that's got Roy Blunt in some trouble with at least 50 Republicans who signed a letter criticizing that move. But it is really rare that a Republican would sign on to some piece of gun control. He's in favor of the mental health aspect. Do you give him some props on this one, or is it kind of, you know, a little bit late in the man's career to be proposing gun control legislation given the violence that's been, you know, racking America?
No, is it good for him that he's taken part in the first gun? And by the way, the red flag laws, what this does is incentivizes states to have red flag laws. It doesn't allow, I mean, they can have them already, but this incentivizes states that, I don't know exactly how they're going to do it, really encourages them. And for me, this gun control legislation's about 1/1000th of what it needs to be. Until we're ready to take military weapons out of civilian hands, we're not going to get anywhere. But give them credit, the 10 Republicans who, for the first time in decades, are willing to do something. What I found really great about the compromise was if liberals or Democrats had just come up with the idea of let's fund mental health centers, the people on the right would have been against it. You know, it's too much government money. Well, that was their counteroffer. That was what they wanted, and good for them that they wanted to fund mental health centers, which we really need. And the fact that we're doing anything to cut this is fine. And you know, sure, I think Roy Blunt has a mixed legacy post-Trump. Very few, really, the only Republicans that have stood out have been Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger. And
yeah, but that's a different issue. That's not gun control. But here's the thing.
Okay,
you know, the man's
saying
been
yes, good for him.
The guy's
good
been
for
in the
him.
U.S. Senate for a very long time. And isn't it reasonable to say, my goodness, as you're walking out the door in the 11th hour, you're on the 18th green, and now you're finally getting through this mental health measure, which you said you were going to do after Sandy Hook, but now here we are in 2022, and we're finally getting it?
I think it's great that we're finally doing it. However, I have to wonder if Roy Blunt is just trying to stay on the side of respectability so he can get good lobbying jobs once he's out of there. It's like, you know, he decided not to support Trump's coup. Like, you have to respect that. That was a good move. Going along with this, it's like this makes him more palatable to the kind of people who want a good hand in Washington.
Well, I've always,
go ahead. Go ahead, Bill.
I've always liked Roy Blunt, and I think that the fact that he's late to the party, as you might say, Charlie, you still have to welcome people in. I mean, if you want your views to prevail, you can't be upset because somebody is finally coming over. So I think good for Roy Blunt.
Right, and I was just going to say, like, you know, presidents, especially if they serve 2 terms, pardon people on the way out the door that if they pardon them the second day they were president, you know, they would have to, like, answer to that. But on your way out, you know, bully for you. And I just learned this yesterday because the first time I actually saw it, then I went and looked. 7 of the 10 most violent states are red states. So, so let's, you know.
And including this one we're here right here.
So if you give the chance for a state, if a state wants to take all these measures and they can now do it, then I have to applaud Roy Blunt.
Charlie,
I wouldn't applaud him because we've had so many homicides in this city, which is in his state. And where has he been? Where has he been?
I'll tell you where he's been. He's been one of the best, he's been one of the most heavily funded representatives by the NRA throughout his career, and I think and again, yes, I don't think he doesn't need any help getting lobbying jobs. He'd go be just fine. But I think that it's an interesting statement. I bet no one of those 10 has been such an NRA-funded guy. And to Bill's point, at least, you know, you could be mad at what he didn't do all these years, and I very much disagreed with him. He was a great constituent senator from Missouri, but I think, you know, but yeah, good for him that he finally came around.
Let's go from the federal level to the county level. Wow, what a week we had Alvin Reid when it came to Sam Page. First of all, he sent a letter criticizing Republican council member Tim Fitch and his primary opponent, Jane Duker, the attorney, in a letter sent to Assistant U.S. Attorney Hal Goldsmith. So there was that letter, and then immediately it ended up in the press, and that was quite the kerfuffle. And then Jane Duker retorted by producing some emails by one Darby Howard, who used to be the assistant director of the jail in St. Louis County, who in April of 2021 was complaining about the appointee of Sam Page, Dr. Sam Page, Tony Weaver, that 14 months ago, saying that his activity and his behavior was inappropriate. So maybe for our viewers, you can sort this out. What's going on right here?
Well, one, I would start with sending the letter to Hal Goldsmith. Now, I don't know if you're in a situation like him where you've just indicted, like, powerful people, you know, throughout the region. I don't know if that puts you in a good mood or a bad mood, but I think that the last thing you want is a letter from the county executive, kind of like, you know, maybe telling you that, hey, you need to do this or you need to do that, because he might say, like, you know what I need to do? Yeah, right. So I have no explanation for whatsoever.
Well, I mean, here's the explanation. They wanted to get that letter into the media, and it worked. You know, they're getting all these banner headlines. Here's what Sam Page writes in this letter. That letter wasn't for Hal Goldsmith. That letter was for all of us. I think it's hilarious that they wrote it to Hal Goldsmith, of all people. But
it did have that letter from the bunker mentality to it, and especially when he said, I have no firsthand knowledge of this, but I'll say this about Tim Fitch, and I have no firsthand knowledge of this, but I'll say it about Jane Duker. Why would you do that?
It was like, it read like, well, first of all, I thought the most ironic thing. What the stuff about Fitch, whatever one thinks about it, he was telling Hal Goldsmith what was going on at a time that Steve Stenger was basically in a fishbowl in his office. I mean, he knew what cereal Steve Stenger was having that morning, and he's telling him what Tim Fitch is allegedly doing, which I think was made up. And so the idea, the premise was just crazy. And then, as you point out, it read more like, you know, some kid, you know, middle school kid going, you know, Sally was kissing, you know, Steve and so saw it. You know, I mean, it's like somebody told me this, and I was like, what are you talking about? This is a serious man. And Hal Goldsmith has been a very, very good prosecutor. I mean, he's very successful, and the way I took it, he does not want to be dragged into any political arguments. He didn't even respond. Now, the letter said, look, we have a question from Councilman Fitch. Should we release these subpoenas? One-line letter, that'd be appropriate. You know, but on county executive stationery, this political stuff shouldn't have been there in the first place. And
I might disagree with you on that.
I would too. I mean, like, no, he did it as the county executive.
But it was all political gossip.
I wouldn't have done it.
It was gossip.
But I mean, if you're going to do it, because it would have been worse if he had like, you know, Sam Page, anesthesiologist.
Ray's saying that Sam Page was using government facilities for campaigning.
No.
I don't agree with
that.
that.
He was, but in addition to that, Hal Goldsmith, I think a clue here is Hal Goldsmith didn't dignify it with a response. He sent a letter to he sent a letter. He responded to Beth Orwick, who hadn't even written to him, saying, I think if Sam Page was talking about this, let him know. You can do what you. And then the answer was, you know, they were trying to use him for cover for not being willing to. And let's keep one other detail. It indicated that the investigation of St. Louis County, investigations, plural, are ongoing. So stay tuned, folks. He's saying there's more. And what a time to be sending a letter to Hal Goldsmith.
As for Darby and his complaint, you know, 14 months ago, this is 20/20 hindsight. Now, turns out this guy was a scoundrel. But, you know, somebody complains about somebody to the county executive. I don't think the first, or any person in government or boss, their first immediate thing should be like, you're right, I'm going to fire him tomorrow. Right. So,
I mean, they didn't even investigate this, though. That's what's crazy. Like, they knew that they had this political appointee who really had no business being the change management advisor at the jail. They get a complaint about his change management advising. They didn't do anything about it. The personnel director says, oh, this is this weird area. I don't have any control over political appointees. That seems like a problem.
Well, I think what Alvin's pointing out, though, is that the jail did have 5 mysterious deaths. So at that time, people were saying there are problems with the jail. Tony Weaver's probably onto something.
Right, and he was one of those that were saying, like, wait a minute, people are, well, obviously, and then I think they've been sued and lost or settled on at least one of them.
But yeah, there were big problems at the jail, and people were saying, hey, this guy is going about things in a way that is going to make things worse. We are going to be unable to get the change we need because this guy is in here meddling in a way that is creating insubordination. It should have been at least looked at.
Well, and Tony Weaver was a controversial appointment anyway. I mean, with his background with Albert Walton, that you would think that Sam Page, if he got a note from somebody saying, hey, this guy's a problem, you go, oh, I better look into that one.
But he wasn't going to look into it because let's not forget to connect the dots between Representative Walton Gray voting, staying over past her term to vote against Ritter Days, his political enemy, being council chairman. So there's a relationship to the county's unwillingness to deal with this
that's
guy.
Not fair, because now you're trying to connect and tell you the reason that she stayed on was so I could hire Tony Weaver because I knew he was a crook and I'm a crook and everybody's crooked. You're kind of connecting names.
I didn't say,
Alvin,
let's be clear.
Did the press go a little bit too far when it said, oh, and even members of the Walton family are contact tracers for the county? I'm like, so what?
That wasn't a problem.
No one wanted that job anyway.
Alvin, the trade-off was him getting the job and her doing that vote, not anything to do with her.
All right.
That's not.
Bill McClellan. Cori Bush, U.S. representative from the St. Louis area, was one of 27 Democratic congressmen to vote against a measure which would beef up security for the families of Supreme Court justices. As you know, a guy was just arrested the last week or the week before for trying to kill Justice Brett Kavanaugh. And so Congress is, raising the money to protect the justices families. Do you think that she was in the right to do that?
No, and whenever I talk about this congressional race, let me preface it by saying I'm friends of Steve Roberts' family, so I have a bias in this. But I think Cori Bush was totally wrong. These are crazy times, and I think that people need, the justices need protection. And I thought that her language and her explanation of her vote was very disturbing. I mean, when she was talking about they don't need, the justices don't need protection, we need protection from them, it sounded like the mirror opposite of what the pro-life extremists say when they'd say, I didn't shoot a doctor, I was protecting babies, and go, no, 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 it's two different things. And I think that you can disagree with the Supreme Court, and I do, and I don't think very highly of them, but they need protection, and that's what this is about. This isn't about anything else.
All right, I agree with you, but I think she was making and maybe not wording it right, but I think she said, like, no, we need protection from them just because of the votes that they made. I don't think that had anything to do with violence or...
Well, it's a dangerous path to go down.
I don't know. That's kind of...
Okay,
But I would have voted for it because this is one of those things where, why do we always have to do everything piecemeal? I think that's an American problem. Okay, look, it's been proven. Times are what they are, and either side could say it's their fault, or whatever. But it's now to the point where, like, if you were in a situation like that, you, your family, everybody, how much does it take for all these people and their families to be protected? And I'm fine with that. Let's just pay the price for the ignorance that is being spread throughout this country, and then maybe more people in Congress and whatnot. Instead, like, the only reason we're having to shell out all this money for security and all that is because there's too much violence and too much ignorance in this country. And we got to combat that, and then maybe we won't be having to spend all this money. But for now, we got to spend it.
You know, a lot of the votes that were against this bill were people who were saying it didn't go far enough. You know, right now, there are judges who've been killed. There was one in Wisconsin. There was one in New Jersey. They're saying we need to protect all federal judges. It's crazy to think that we don't.
And I think I disagreed with her vote. I would have voted differently. And I don't think it was good politics. But I kind of like the fact that in an election year, when she has an opponent, she's still willing. She's authentic.
She's true to herself.
Cori Bush is, you know, marches to the beat of her own drum, whatever you want to call it. And in an age when so few people think independently on both sides of the aisle, I like that about her. I don't agree with the vote. I don't agree with the vote.
Yeah, I just didn't like the language in it. I didn't like the reasoning, and I just found it disturbing.
Yeah,
I think the judges need, and maybe all the judges need protection.
But they do need protection. There's
Well,
no
they do.
question.
The federal marshals protect the federal judges. You know, that's what they're looking for.
But I don't know what happens when you go home.
She spent $300,000 on her own security. That's been well documented.
Well,
that's both campaign money and public money.
What's interesting is, God forbid, something happens to one of these justices, it's going to come down hardest on the other side. In other words, whoever is going to be blamed for it, let's just hope it doesn't happen. And I'm all for security for it.
And by the way, Bill and I on Next Up are going to be talking to James Robinson, who directed Harvey Milk, the opera at Opera Theater St. Louis, talking about tragedies and public officials. We'll get into that at about 1:30. But first, Ray, I want to ask you about the trash in the city of St. Louis. A couple of issues here. Joe Vaccaro, member of the Board of Aldermen, said that it's so bad that his constituents are now, driving around the city trying to find a free dumpster where they can put their garbage. And then Sharon Tyus, who is a supporter of the mayor, said that the mayor, Tashara Jones, might be a one-term mayor if they don't fix up this trash problem. There's so much of it, it's not being picked up enough. In fact, Tyus told Fox 2 that she's ready to start driving a truck herself. Well, do you think that trash pickup is such a big problem in the city of St. Louis, where they're missing 12 to 15 routes every day, that it's going to be the Achilles heel or the Waterloo for Mayor Jones?
Absolutely not, first of all. I just don't think I don't know where that comes from. But I mean...
Sharon Tyus said it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sharon Tyus, okay. No, I don't think that's accurate. But I think the city, and, that's something the city... I don't think there's a right way to do it. Some municipalities, do outsource it, and others don't. And I think it really would depend on, for everybody, staffing any kind of service right now is difficult. And so they just got to make a calculation. I hate to say another study, but they just got to figure out whether Reid McClellan might be able to figure it out.
Well, they could just go to Republic Services or go to a private outfit.
Well, but I'm saying that Reid McClellan needs to study first whether they should do that. But I think you can really. I don't mean to be wishy-washy, but it really depends on each individual
They can't hire enough people, and the city has this bizarre residency requirement. It's no longer in place for public safety officials, but everybody else who works for the city of St. Louis, even if you're a $15 an hour full-time employee, you have to live in the city. Well, and it's hard to find people who want to do these trash pickup jobs. Now they had to add recycling back. People were really wound up about the fact that the city wasn't picking up recycling. And so they tried to make space to make that program work, and they just don't have quite enough to go around. It's a huge problem. But I think they're going to have to modernize that personnel office.
The idea got floated that Kirkwood was going to drop recycling, and that idea lasted, I think, overnight. I'm not kidding. Literally, it was like I think my laptop just started shaking and been like, "What is going on?" Right? I found out, and so I think what the city could do is one thing and say like, "Okay, it works in places where people pay for it." Okay, and I think you have to look at, all right, if we were going to increase whatever people, you know, I guess you already paid.
We pay $14 a household.
Right.
Yes.
So if you took away the residency requirement, and instead of $14, it became $18, and that fixed the problem, do you think I'm not asking you to answer this question, but
no, people
maybe,
would pay that.
that's what I was going to say. I think people would pay that additional $4.
It's possible.
This is why the consulting service.
Lengthy study, right, Bill? Lengthy study.
McClellan Reid. I don't know how.
Sarah, I want to ask you about Main Street in St. Charles. Yes. There's a measure there that the mayor of St. Charles City supports, and that would say that right now you can't have more than 50% of your gross receipts from a restaurant be from liquor. But they want to change that. But there are some businesses on Main Street who say, no, that's going to ruin the family aspect of this town. And when you go to Main Street in St. Charles, you do see a lot of people pushing strollers. So what do you think? Should they loosen the regulations on these businesses so that bars can thrive, or should they keep the family feel?
I think there's a good case to be made for changing these rules. You know, if you hear what local business owners there are saying, they're saying these are like, it's very complicated, and there's ways people can get around it, and it's not really fully being enforced. The city spends $500,000 a year trying to audit these businesses for something that people are trying to find a way to skirt. So I think, you know, there's a way that the city can come down on a bar that's bad or is, you know, contributing to the quality of life in a negative way. They're talking about changes in this proposal that would do that. I don't think this 50-50 rule is one that needs to stay on the books.
I'm pro-bar. Now, I think I'm pro-bar. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, you know, no one likes bars more than me. But I agree with the present owners who say don't change the rules. You know, it's just like if you buy a house near the airport and then you complain about noise, or the condo owners who bought condos next to New Life and then complained about the homeless. It's a question of who's there first, and the people who've invested money in their little businesses because they like the ambience of the street. I don't think it's fair to all of a sudden say to them, we're changing the rules and now it's going to be more of a nightclub district.
Well, you're making it sound like, you know, folks in St. Charles are going to be dead drunk at 11 o'clock in the morning if you change this, you know, regulation. Stroller time is over at 8 o'clock, you know, come on now.
And I gotta say, you know, the reporting the Riverfront Times did on this, a lot of these people who are against this change are saying this could bring people from North County. It could bring the thug element.
I wonder what that is.
Yeah.
No, that was regrettable and racist, I thought.
And also,
but nonetheless,
Charlie,
I will say, along with Kirkwood Avenue in Kirkwood, South Grand and South St. Louis, Main Street in St. Charles is a special street, and you don't want to do anything to ruin it.
It is, and I had
so many people on the sidewalks.
I had a business there. I like.
Did you?
The Riverfront Times had an
adult bookstore?
Called it was an adult bookstore. St. Charles Express. We came.
Oh, that what it was called.
We came in and spent like a year, and then we left, and it was like kind of
it was too wild.
We only have about a minute or so to go. Okay. But this week, Alvin Reid at the History Museum, a couple of members of the State Department were in town talking about an expo, a World's Fair for Minneapolis in 2027. Actually, the co-chair of that effort is Bob Clark of Clayco, former guest of ours here. Do you think, as some people in the audience did, that it might be time for St. Louis to get another World's Fair?
To try? I mean, there's nothing wrong with trying. There's nothing wrong with trying to get the San Diego Chargers to move to St. Louis. All right, they're mad. The family's tearing itself apart. We should try to do anything, because if you don't try, you will not succeed.
And we got $500 million we can give them from the Rams settlement.
Or hey, there's no reason to not take that money and try to do something else too.
I'm just kidding.
I think it'd be a disaster to get the World Fair here. I don't know what we'd do, but we wouldn't handle it well. I can just see Governor Parson addressing the world. You know, I don't think it'll work.
I will say, Adam Kloppe from the History Museum was there, and he said that in 1904, because of the World's Fair, we put in the pipes to get clean water, and we wouldn't have had that infrastructure at that time if not for the World's Fair.
All kinds of stuff from there.
Yeah,
there was all kinds of stuff.
Hey, that's all we have for that segment. Let's see what the viewers had to say about last week's Donnie Bash. How about getting people comfortable riding the existing Metrolink first before expanding it? Like not having to worry if they're going to be harassed, mugged, or shot. Money for that first. That was tweeted by Kyrock31. Katie Fisher wrote, since 1987, it's the only place to be on Thursdays at 7. Enjoyed being part of the live studio audience at Donnie Bash last night. Thank you, Ms. Fisher. Television obsolete? Ray Hartman, seriously. I watch Channel 9 PBS all the time. That from State Representative Tracy McCreary, and we thank Representative McCreary. You can write us care of 9 PBS. 63108 is zip code. Don't forget those emails, donnybrook@9pbs.org, and those tweets. Use hashtag DonnybrookSTL. And you can find us wherever you find your favorite podcast. That would be TuneIn, Google Play, Spotify, and Apple. Thanks to Sarah for sitting in for Wendy on this edition. Don't go away, everybody, because Bill and I will be talking to a panel about Pride Month here in St. Louis. Hope you join us. Don't go away.
Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9 PBS.